Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Violence Against Women, What Everyone Needs to Know, by Jacqui True, narrated by Gould. The patriarchy is a judge that judges us for being born, and our punishment is the violence you don't see. It's femicide, impunity for the killer, it's disappearance, it's rape. Collectivo las decis, Chile, un violador en tu camino, a rapist in your way. Preface. Eliminating violence against women and girls, VAWG, globally, is one of the major challenges of the 21st century. Since I first had the idea of writing this book in 2013, awareness of the problem of violence against women and girls has grown exponentially. This is largely the result of the enormously impactful #MeToo movement against sexual harassment that began on social media and diffused around the world, 1.7 million tweets across 85 countries. Time magazine made the #MeToo Silence Breakers its Person of the Year in 2017, the same year in which feminism was crowned the most searched-for word in the Merriam-Webster online dictionary. This is hardly surprising given that 2017 commenced with millions of women and men joining the pink-hatted Women's March in Washington, D.C., and related marches around the world to denounce sexist rhetoric and demand a greater voice for women in political life. The ensuing years have seen the movement bring about the removal of many elite men from their positions, including 3 members of the US Congress, the Mayor of Melbourne, Australia, and a cabinet minister in the United Kingdom. We have also seen an avowed harasser elected to the presidency of the United States, and a US Supreme Court justice nominated despite allegations of sexual assault and misconduct. The proof is in. Serial sexual predators are able to achieve professional and political heights. Misogyny, an ideology that expresses hatred and resentment toward women and thus incites gender-based violence, has re-entered the English lexicon as a result of these violent acts by individuals, be they incels, an online community of men who blame women for their lack of sexual intimacy, political leaders, or violent extremist groups ranging from Daesh, ISIS or ISIL to the alt-right. Much of the VAWG is of a quantity unknown. This is because it has been historically unrecognised by most societies and experts, and until recently, even by some of its survivors. Regrettably, in some situations, violence is so normalised that women and girls come to accept physical, verbal, and sexual abuse as their lot. This lack of individual and societal awareness of VAWG is due in large part to structural gender inequality. This inequality has shaped all of our social, political, and judicial establishments and has meant that, for instance, few institutions have enabled equal access to justice for women and girls. Legislation to prevent and protect against VAWG and to punish its perpetrators is often poorly implemented, is inadequate in its scope and depth, or simply does not exist. Many countries have no consistent definition, baseline data, or systematic documentation of types of violence faced by women and girls. There are few official reports to state agencies, and these barely scratch the surface of actual violence, as indicated by a recent UN and World Health Organization (WHO) surveys. There is, moreover, the cruel, self-perpetuating nature of VAWG. Those experiencing violence may fear that family members, public figures, and institutions, such as the police and courts, will shame them for speaking out and trivialise the incidents. This consequently stops many women and girls from reporting the violent crimes committed against them, as a result, the cycle of VAWG continues. Determining whether VAWG is on the increase or is in decline overall is really impossible. That has not stopped some experts from claiming that violence, defined as homicides and casualties from war, is in steady decline globally since the end of World War II. Those claims ignore VAWG as if it were not a proper or recognised type of violence. They fail to acknowledge and methodologically come to terms with the silent and largely unaccounted for violence perpetrated against women and girls across the centuries. Once we factor in VAWG, including the contemporary incidents of VAWG that we know much more about, we cannot bravely boast that our civilization has been successful in reducing violence. Certainly not the violence that is perpetrated against women and girls every day. In fact, if we counted all forms of violence against women and girls listed in the 1993 UN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, DVAW, total numbers would exceed all the deaths from war in the 20th century. While we should eschew generalizations about violence and VAWG, in specific contexts, we can observe increased VAWG where women and girls are targeted in unique and gender-specific ways compared to men and boys. Two egregious examples come readily to mind. First, since the withdrawal of ISAF troops from Afghanistan in 2014, Afghan women and girls have faced an ongoing legacy of violence. Gendered violence in the form of femicide, honour killings, mutilation, and intimate partner abuse remains widespread throughout the country, and a 2018 UN report lamented that Afghan women still faced limited access to justice and significant inequality before the law. Second, as women's presence in political decision-making increases, so too does the rate of violence they encounter, from stalking and physical harassment to more modern practices of online trolling and cyberbullying. Physical and psychological violence is frequently deployed against politically active women to control, restrict, or inhibit their full and equal political participation. This book introduces the listener to the problem of violence against women identified by social movements, researchers, and policymakers. It provides key arguments, raw material, macro data, and up-to-date knowledge on VAWG and its intersections with many other issues, as well as the policy, legal, and advocacy frameworks needed to end this violence. We all have a story to tell about the forms of VAWG that we know of or may have experienced. That is not surprising because even in Victoria, the prosperous state of Australia where I live, intimate partner violence is the leading contributor to death, disability and illness in women aged 15 to 44. But while we frequently read or learn about particular experiences or incidents of VAWG, we are often not aware of the full picture. What kinds of violence are we talking about when VAWG is discussed or reported? Who is affected most? That is, who is likely to be the victim and perpetrator? Does VAWG occur in all societies? If so, to what extent? What are the major causes and effects of this violence, and how can we prevent it in our society and other places? Which approaches and solutions show the most promise in reducing VAWG? Are we making any progress in eliminating this violence? This book addresses the current state of knowledge and research on all of these questions. It surveys our best understanding of the causes and consequences of VAWG in the private home, local community, workplace, public, and transnational realms. In so doing, it traverses multidisciplinary perspectives on the problem, including public health, criminology, sociology, psychology, anthropology, political science, human rights, development studies, gender studies, and international relations or law perspectives, all of which contribute distinct knowledge and insight. Before going much further, I need to define exactly what VAWG is. This is the focus of Chapter 1. Part 1. Overview and Definitions. 1. What is violence against women and girls? VAWG. What do we mean by VAWG? Violence against women and girls, VAWG, is a catch-all phrase. It includes a wide range of forms of violence. Often when people talk about VAWG in Western societies, they are referring to intimate partner violence or domestic violence in the family or private sphere. But VAWG extends beyond these forms and spaces. Women and girls experience abuse and violence within and across multiple sites, at home, at work, and in public spaces, and the experience transcends national boundaries, including globalized settings such as international sporting events, national borders during migration, and in special economies or export processing zones with limited legal regulation. Indeed, the very notion of VAWG as a uniquely private sphere issue is part of the problem in addressing it. That it is merely private has served to justify various types of violence against women for centuries. Recall the Napoleonic Code, which states that every man is a king in his own home, and therefore whatever goes on in that home is beyond the purview of the law and the state. We are still living with the legacy of this notion of the private realm and of men's unquestioned power within it. The most widespread definition of VAWG is that adopted by the United Nations, UN, in 1993, in the General Assembly's Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, DVAW. VAWG includes any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or private life. DVAW characterizes VAWG as the result of historically unequal power relations between men and women. The UN's Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, General Recommendation 19, 1992, is also definitive. CEDAW considers VAWG to be a form of discrimination and a violation of human rights. It succinctly states that VAWG is violence that affects women and girls disproportionately and or that is deliberately used to harm women and girls in particular. In both these international agreements based on a consensus among states, VAWG pertains not only to physical and sexual violence, but also to psychological and emotional harm and suffering. Verbal abuse and threats, for instance, count as VAWG. So too does emotional abuse, which includes derogatory comments made in a domineering and disempowering manner about one's worth, personality, body, or emotional state. Often patterns of abuse can be so controlling that the person experiencing them may not be able to recognize that abuse as a form of violence in order to exercise the agency necessary to stop it or leave the situation. This is particularly the case with intimate partner violence, which disproportionately affects young women aged 15 to 25. In some cases, young women may not expect to be treated with respect and dignity if they have grown up in a society or community in which they do not hold a high social status or lack the sense of self-esteem that would be nurtured by families and educational systems that equally value women and girls alongside men and boys. In 2003, economic violence was added to the UN definition of VAWG. There are egregious cases of economic exploitation of women. For example, the armed group Daesh in Iraq has trafficked, enslaved and bartered more than 6,000 Yazidi women and girls since 2014, selling them for up to US $165 each. However, economic violence may also be common in an intimate partner or family relationship in the form of acts that control or monitor the use and distribution of economic resources, and may include forcibly controlling money or other assets, stealing cash, not allowing a woman or girl to take part in any financial decisions, and preventing a woman or girl from gaining employment. This type of VAWG has huge implications not only for women victims, but also for the prosperity and well-being of societies generally. Undermining women's economic rights and autonomy through economic violence reduces the available skills and talents that can be harnessed to generate productive capacity in society and limits the overall resources available to meet common goals, not least of which is provision of quality food, shelter, health and education. In terms of new understandings of VAWG, online sexual abuse and image-based abuse are currently becoming recognised in international agreements and national legislation. Chapter 8 further explores what constitutes this type of VAWG, as well as how and why it has emerged across societies in a technologically enabled Internet age. Similarly, the term femicide, while not currently featured in international definitions of VAWG, is frequently used to refer to forms of VAWG that result in death. Chapter 3 explores this concept and cases of femicide across the world. What does gender-based violence mean? Both DVAW and CEDAW define VAWG as gender-based. But what does it mean to say violence is gender-based? Let's start by defining what is not gender-based violence. Violence that affects women and girls as well as men and boys randomly or in a non-specific or untargeted way is not gender-based. For example, a terrorist attack in a tourist hotel that randomly kills civilians, including women, men, boys and girls, is not gender-based. However, if that attack specifically targets an area where civilians are disproportionately women and children, or if the attack forcibly uses women and girls as suicide bombers, then it would constitute gender-based violence. To give another example, a mass murder of all the men in a family is not gender-based VAWG. However, that mass murder may be gender-based VAWG if there is an intent to harm or kill based on an ideology of gender or assumptions about gender, such as a belief that only able-bodied men are a threat because they are the ones who bear arms and protect others through the use of force. There has often been misunderstanding of and pushback against the concept of gender because it challenges the notion that people's identities, roles and relationships are fixed or determined by nature. The accepted definitions of VAWG, however, understand this violence to be based on gender norms that are readily changeable. They view masculinities and femininities, the role of women and men, and those who do not identify with binary roles, and the relationships among them to be socially constructed rather than biologically determined. In 2017, CEDAW updated its definition of VAWG, adopting the term gender-based violence against women, to make explicit the gendered causes and impacts of the violence. Acknowledging the gender-based nature of VAWG allows us to see the violence as a social rather than an individual problem. Gender is understood as a structure or set of power relations that enable violence rather than as a particular individual attribute or role. Given this structure, the CEDAW Committee calls for comprehensive, systematic responses to VAWG instead of responses aimed at individual violent events and vis-à-vis individual perpetrators or victims. The committee considers gender-based VAWG one of the fundamental social, political and economic means by which the subordinate position of women with respect to men and their stereotyped roles are perpetuated. Violence is employed to reproduce and maintain gender hierarchies. Consequently, responses to VAWG must address the larger power structures that contribute to gender-based violence. Is domestic violence the same thing as family violence, relationship violence, and intimate partner violence? The term domestic violence refers to spousal and non-spousal violence occurring in the family home or household. Although it often denotes intimate partner violence in common usage, the term in fact has a far broader meaning. One concern with domestic violence as a term is that its association with violence in the home, family or private sphere may unintentionally minimise its threat to individuals, families, communities and societies more broadly. The word domestic is also linked to domesticate, which encourages us to view the home as an inherently safe place, free from violence. This association again limits our understanding of the seriousness and pervasiveness of VAWG occurring in the home or family. Wherever it occurs, VAWG is violence and is a problem. When people refer to VAWG as domestic violence, they consciously or subconsciously mask the bigger picture of such violence, which occurs in many different settings, from private to public spheres, in technologically mediated spaces, and within and outside of relationships. To get a sense of the magnitude and scale of domestic violence, which continues to be under-recognised relative to its scale, consider that from 2000 to 2012, more women were shot and killed by intimate partners in the United States than the total number of American troops killed during that period in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. What is the difference between gender-based violence, sexual violence, and the concept of VAWG? Gender-based violence, sexual violence, and VAWG have distinct but related meanings. This is especially the case because the prominent international definitions now refer to gender-based violence against women, as mentioned with respect to CEDAW. Gender-based violence is a crime committed against persons, whether male or female, because of their sex and or socially constructed gender identity, roles and relations that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, psychological or economic harm or suffering, including threats of such acts, coercion or arbitrary deprivation of liberty. To be considered gender-based violence, attacks on men, boys, women or girls should be motivated or justified, though not exclusively, by the gender of the individual or group. Examples of this include attacks on or arrests of men, boys, girls and women for homosexuality, forced nudity or strip searches at checkpoints that may be targeting gender identity and role, sexual harassment of female workers and downgrading of their pay or position as a result, exclusion of trans people or those who identify with a non-binary gender, and the forcible removal of children from parents that may also target gender and kin relations in the family. In all of these instances, gender may not be the only factor leading to violence against individuals or groups. More often, it intersects with and compounds other factors that lead to violence. Gender and age, for instance, are the critical factors that inform why young women may be seen as easy prey. Equally, the interplay between gender and ethnicity, or minority status may motivate violence with the intent of shaming a community in which the honour of girls and women is closely connected to men's identity and roles, as well as group identity and cohesion. While not always the case, gender-based violence includes and may be manifested as a form of sexual violence. Therefore, sexual violence is considered a subset of gender-based violence. Sexual violence includes an array of crimes beyond rape, including sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, forced sterilisation, and the imposition of measures intended to prevent births within a group. Sexual violence is listed in the 1998 Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court as violence that constitutes acts of genocide, Article 6, crimes against humanity, Article 7, and war crimes, Article 8. Sometimes sexual harassment at work and sexual abuse of children is included in the concept of sexual violence, which, as a subset of gender-based violence, is in turn related to, though not coterminous with, VAWG. VAWG addresses violence that either intentionally or disproportionately affects women and girls, whereas gender-based violence exploits gender inequalities, differences and hierarchies, be they among women, girls, men, boys, or people who do not identify with binary gender. As previously discussed, VAWG consists of different types of violence: physical, sexual, psychological, emotional, and economic, as well as the forms it takes: intimate partner violence, rape, acid burning, forced marriage, trafficking, and so on. In some parts of the world, VAWG is the preferred term because of its legal basis and incorporation of gender-based VAWG. However, it does not typically consider gender-based violence against men and boys. That is not to say, however, that gender-based violence does not affect men and boys. Do men and boys experience gender-based violence? Yes, they do. Gender-based violence incorporates crimes committed against all sexes and gender identities, which includes men and boys. A classic case of gender-based violence is the practice of bacha in Afghanistan, in which impoverished boys or young men are trafficked and sold to older men for use as dancers and sexual playthings. Based on the definition of gender-based violence in this book, these boys experience gender-based violence systematically. Their abuse is so normalized that some consider it a part of Afghan culture, with Afghan men openly flaunting their bacha boys and the authorities, including government officials, largely dismissing calls to investigate or end the practice. Far from being a cultural nuance, bacha is a harmful traditional practice that is increasingly being exposed by international organisations, the UN, Human Rights Watch, and the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, among others, as a form of violence and abuse of power. The male experience of gender-based violence has also come to light in conflict scenarios in Bosnia, Uganda, Iraq and Sudan, where men and boys have faced homosexualization, feminization, genital harm, and sex-selective killing as a means to humiliate, emasculate, and divest them of their power and masculine identities. Of course, in many circumstances of male gender-based violence, gender stereotypes and concepts around masculinity may prevent men from disclosing the gender-based violence perpetrated against them, leading to incomplete data on its scope and prevalence. This book focuses on gender-based VAWG. However, gender-based violence perpetrated against men and boys and people of non-binary gender is mentioned throughout, Because gender-based violence against men and boys is part of the very same problem and a product of the very same gender structure of power relations that affects women and girls, with similar, if not the same, root causes and solutions. 2. Historical struggle. How did VAWG first gain recognition? Violence against women and girls, from Narrator.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?